नमस्कार मंडळी, मी नमिता वेदक, महाराष्ट्र मंडळ शिकागोची अध्यक्ष. तुम्हा सर्वांचं आजच्या इतिहास मंचावर स्वागत. आणि आपले पाहुणे जे आहेत, रोहन ठाणेदार आणि श्री ठाणेदार यांचंही स्वागत. आपला कट्टा तर आता रंगणारच आहे, छानच माहिती मिळणार आहे. आणि तुम्ही सगळे श्रोते जे आलेले आहात, तर तुम्हालाही थँक्यू आल्याबद्दल. त्याचबरोबर आठवण करून देते, आपला येत्या 15 नोव्हेंबरला प्रोग्राम आहे, सण कोंदळ दिवाळीचा प्रोग्राम. तुम्हाला ईमेल आलीच असेल, पण नसेल मिळाली तर कट्ट्यावरती नक्कीच घालू. परत उद्या पण सकाळी परत कट्ट्यांवरती माहिती घालू. तर तुम्ही नक्की या, तिकीट काढा. आणि आपल्याकडचे 80 परफॉर्मर्स आहेत लोकल, त्यांचं टॅलेंट आणि ते 2 महिने सतत प्रॅक्टिस चालू आहे ह्याच्यासाठी. तर नक्की त्यांना प्रोत्साहन द्यायला, सपोर्ट द्यायला नक्की या आणि बघा. फारच सुंदर चाइल्ड फ्रेंडली नाटक आहे. 5 वर्ष ते 90 वर्षाच्या सगळ्या लोकांनी भाग पण घेतलेला आहे आणि बघण्यासाठी पण चांगलं छानच होतोय. मी आता एका रिअल प्रॅक्टिस मध्ये आहे, म्हणून बॅकग्राऊंड मध्ये थोडा नॉईज आवाज आहे. पण नक्की या तुम्हाला आणि आम्हाला सपोर्ट करा. लवकरच भेटूया. दिवाळीचा फराळ पण आहे सुंदर, तर आमच्या बरोबर नक्की शेअर करायला या आणि भेटूया आपण. आणि आपले नवीन टीम आणि ओल्ड टीमला पण भेटायला तुम्हाला चान्स मिळेल. आपलं नुकतंच एजीएम झाल्यामुळे त्याच्यामध्ये इलेक्ट झालेले नवीन टीम पण आहे. तर लवकरच भेटूया. नोव्हेंबर 15 दिवाळी प्रोग्राम सण कोंदळ, वेस्टमॉन्ट हायस्कूलला, सकाळी 11 वाजता. तर आता मी जास्त वेळ न घेता चेतन रेगे यांच्याकडे आपलं इतिहास मंचाचा कट्टा सुरू करायला देते. थँक्यू.
नमस्कार, सगळ्यांचं इतिहास मंचावरती खूप खूप स्वागत. मी चेतन रेगे, महाराष्ट्र मंडळ शिकागो तर्फे आपल्या सगळ्यांचं या 5 वर्षांचा आमचा इतिहास मंच, ज्याच्यावर मोर दॅन 160 आतापर्यंत लेक्चर्स झालेले आहेत इतिहास विषयक. आणि आपण प्रत्येक शुक्रवारी इथे भेटतो आणि इतिहासातल्या वेगवेगळ्या विषयांवर चर्चा करतो आणि वी ट्राय टू लर्न. Today we have a special guest, Congressman Shri Thanedar. Very very warm welcome to you. आणि आजचे जे गेस्ट स्पीकर आहेत, मिस्टर रोहन ठाणेदार आणि मिस्टर प्रमोदजी ठाणेदार. एक्सलंट कॉम्बिनेशन. खरं तर आजचा जो टॉपिक आहे, थर्ड बॅटल ऑफ पानिपत, is a excellent chapter of history. ऍक्च्युली मराठा हिस्ट्रीमध्येच नव्हे तर इंडियाच्या हिस्ट्रीमध्ये अत्यंत पिव्होटल पॉइंट जो मानला जातो, तेवढं त्याचं इम्पॉर्टन्स आहे. आणि वर्ल्डमधल्या ग्रेटेस्ट बॅटल्समध्ये देखील थर्ड बॅटल ऑफ पानिपतचं नाव येतं. पानिपत हे बेसिकली मराठ्यांच्या इतिहासामध्ये एक प्रकारची जखम आहे, जी अजूनही त्याच्यावर थोडीशी खपली आहे, पण ती अजून भरलेली नाही. सो इट्स अ वुंड दॅट स्टिल इज पेनफुल, बट वी ॲक्च्युली होल्ड दॅट ॲज आवर तिलक. We basically take pride into the warriors fought in the battle of Panipat. आणि it is said every Marathi family has their ancestors basically participated in the battle, and almost every Marathi family has given warriors, and they were martyred in the battle. So there are a lot of theatrics before the Panipat War, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, who basically created Swarajya, the kingdom of self-rule, to basically start freedom movement of India against all the invaders, which is a great change in the history. Eventually, all the Marathas conquered several plains of India and several regions in India. And now we arrive at 1761, year. And just before that, there are so many things. There is a battle called Atak battle, where we actually founded our Bhagwa flag which is located near Peshawar in Pakistan currently. So that much of Indian land was under control, which is called Atke Par Jhenda. And after that, this Panipat theatrics actually start. And we would be happy to hear from the speakers. I'll just quickly introduce the speakers here. First of all, for Maharashtra Mandal Chicago, thank you so much for the opportunity. And Itihas Manch admins, myself Chetan Rege, Madhav Dada Gogavle, Vishal Navalkar, Vaishnavi Navalkar, Prajakta Joshi, and Namita Vedak. So thank you all, and also special thanks to Manoj Bhatt for helping us with the YouTube live, and Prajakta Joshi and Archana and Priyesh Deshpande for all the publicity effort. So today's speakers, Rohan Thanedar and Pramod Thanedar. Rohan is a software engineer specializing in connected vehicles at the Ford Motor Company. He lives in Chicago and has become a fan of studying all world history, but especially Maratha history. For the last 6 years, he has been learning the Marathi language and is proud to speak and read it. Outside of work, he has many hobbies like biking, photography, cooking, and 3D printing. His dad, Pramod ji, namaste, Pramod Thanedar, his father is a retired structural optimization engineer with 30 years of experience in the auto industry. He also loves reading history, traveling, and hiking. Pramod lives in Detroit, Michigan. Together, they have traveled to many of the forts and places of interest from 17th and 18th century Maratha history, including Raigad, Purandar, Pratapgarh, Shaniwarwada, and Parvati Hill in Pune. On the flyer, actually, you see the picture of one of that. And I have very sweet memories of Rohan, who started his reading in taking deep interest into research level Maratha history, and he has been reading for quite a while, actually, several months ago, and he has arrived at a point where we call him expert now in the research area. But very happy to hear from you, Rohan. I request you to start your speech today. Thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent. Hello, everyone. Namaskar. Thank you for this amazing platform and opportunity, especially to Chetan, not just for today, but for the books and all the encouragement. So yeah, without further ado, I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Screen looks good. It's on the stream, full size. Okay, excellent, excellent. So today I'm going to be talking about the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761. And this will be a two-part presentation. So today is part one, the lead up to the battle, you can say. And why should we care about the Third Battle of Panipat? You know, Chetan gave us some good background information on it. And among other statistics, we can say it was one of the largest battles of the 18th century by many measures. In just a matter of days, 60 to 100,000 people will lose their lives. And so it's clearly something worth studying just for the immense proportions and loss of life. And there are many historical consequences that we're still dealing with today. And as Chetan said, you know, this is still potentially a sore spot for the Maratha history and maybe worth investigating and just further analyzing. So without further ado, my name is Rohan. Special thanks to Chetan and Dr. Uday Kulkarni, who's the author of the book that this presentation is based on. Let's get into it. So a little bit about me first. Here's a picture of me and some other pictures as well. As Chetan said, I'm Detroit born. I'm 28 years of age, and I now live in Chicago. I studied computer science at the University of Michigan. And now I work in connected vehicles and cloud computing at the Ford Motor Company. And I am an enthusiast of all world history and especially military history. Hence, it's not too surprising that I'm presenting about a battle and not maybe some political history. And my interest in history really did get started with the Maratha history and the Maratha Empire, but it's expanded in recent times. And I have really started to enjoy listening to history podcasts about all kinds of history. One favorite, if any of you are looking, is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History series. Is very interesting. So here are a few covers of various titles that I've also been using to learn about the Japanese in World War II, the Romans and the Punic Wars nearly 2,000 years ago, and even the Mongols and Genghis Khan, and how all history is interconnected. So of course we love Maratha history here, and I love it most of all. But world history is also fascinating to me. And why my particular fascination with history and war? I think right now we live in a time of great peace, and we have for many decades. So part of my fascination is, I think, looking back at these battles and wars, what if it were you? You see, many soldiers in world history, they aren't simply willing participants, who want to go for war for glory. They are simply normal individuals caught up in the gears of history, and many of them are victims. And thus, it gives me a great sense of gratitude and even a feeling of luck to be born when I am and where I am, and benefiting from the lessons that were paid in blood by all of our ancestors, especially in this case, as Chetan said. And so when you read a quote like this, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It's easy to take that at the surface level, but there are some mistakes in the past that were made, or some tragedies that the people had to bear that you really, really do not want to repeat. So it's just such a privilege to be able to study this history and not have to live it. And just to put some visuals to some of these Maratha historical site visits that me and Baba have done, here's some photos from December of 2023. This is me. I had a large Maratha beard at the time, standing in front of the Shanwarwada in Pune. Very large, imposing building. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Quite amazing. Highly recommend it. And then also on the same trip, it's me, Ai, Baba, and my older brother Jay atop the Raigad fort, a very important fort and one-time capital of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So very, very cool experience, and I'd highly recommend it. And just a few more photos. Here's also the four of us at the Pratapgarh fort, which is famous for being the location of the Afzal Khan Wad, which many of you may know that story. And then here's Ai in front of the Raigad main gateway. And despite the fact that this is, 1,000 some steps up into the mountains, they've made this gateway that an elephant can pass through. So it just boggles the mind, and it's very cool to see up close. And then finally, here's my Baba Pramod, who some of you may know. And this is us on top of the Purandar fort, also a very historical location, and was a pleasure to visit. So Maratha history is long and storied, and this Panipat battle happens in 1761. So how did I get here, specifically to Panipat? Well, you see, it's because of this book cover right here, Solstice at Panipat. And so let's talk about how I got there. As Chetan mentioned, me and my Baba have been reading Marathi books over the phone for about 6 years now. And this wasn't always dealing with history, but about 2 years ago, we picked up a copy of Challenging Destiny by Medha Bhaskaran in Marathi. And this was a wonderful high-level biography of Chhatrapati Shivaji's life. And the cover for that you can see in the top right corner here. So I highly recommend that book. But this kind of started the spark, for me at least, of wanting to learn more Maratha history. And so Baba and we were both hungry for more. And this is where Chetan comes in, and where we owe him a unrepayable debt. And this is for providing very difficult to find Marathi history books in the United States. Without going to India, this is quite a tall ask. So luckily, Baba was able to get in contact with Chetan, and from his vast library, I highly recommend all of you visit his home and see his library. It's really a thing of beauty. It may be one of the deepest outside of the state of Maharashtra. But we were able to borrow this book, Agryahun Sutka by Dr. Ajit Joshi, which is a fascinating modern research book on just how Shivaji Maharaj was able to make his fantastical, almost magical escape from Agra under the nose of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. So this was also a great story, and it kind of reveals the falsehoods behind many of the popular legends that, Shivaji hid in a sweet box and this and that. So it really got us focused on the academic side of Maratha history. So it was very interesting. And so once we finished that book, naturally, we went back to Chetan, and he had a great recommendation for us then, which took us into the 18th century of Maratha history. And that was Solstice at Panipat. This book here by Dr. Uday Kulkarni was also borrowed from Chetan's library. And this book took us 12 months to finish. And of course, Baba and I are reading from different states, just various nights of the week over the phone. So it's only natural that it took a long time. But this was also kind of a silver lining, as it really let us steep and submerge ourselves in this period of history. And it was always in the background of my thoughts. So it was a very cool experience. So finally, some context and acknowledgements about the Third Battle of Panipat are necessary. I know some of you may know the history much better than I do, but for those who don't, I feel I should give some context. If I say Third Battle of Panipat, it would only be natural for a layman to ask, third battle, what about the first and second battle? So each of the battles of Panipat that are named so are very pivotal battles, and they occur on a kind of long time scale. So the first battle of Panipat occurred almost 200 years before the time we're talking about, in 1526. And this led to the establishment of the Mughal Empire in India. And it was when Babur defeated Ibrahim Khan Lodi. So a very consequential battle. The second battle of Panipat occurred also a long time ago, only 30 years after the first, in 1556. And it was also the Mughal Emperor Akbar versus King Hemu. And had Akbar lost here, the Mughals would have been kicked out of India before they'd ever gained a significant foothold. So already we can see the first two battles of Panipat were incredibly consequential, and the third battle will be as well. So it takes some 200 years for the third battle of Panipat for the conditions to forment. And you'll notice the Mughals are fighting in the first two, but in the third one, the Marathas will be fighting on behalf of the Mughals, which is a bit unexpected, and we'll get into why that is. But it will be against an outsider, Afghanistan's Ahmad Shah Abdali. And like we said, there are consequences for India into the modern day. And so some other context that we'll be covering is what you can call the Maratha peak. Now, we're talking about an empire that was only established in 1674 and just survived a 3-decade brutal war of attrition, and yet is still able to emerge as a superpower and champion something resembling self-rule, also known as Swarajya. So, despite the fact that this kind of is remembered as a dark battle and time in Maratha history, it should not be forgotten what was accomplished in the lead up to that, and even what was regained after. And finally, we must acknowledge the Mughal decline. You see, Aurangzeb, when he was the emperor, the Mughals could not be questioned. They were a massive empire. Everybody was afraid of them. And in this story, we will see them reduced to puppet rulers, just ruling out of Delhi, who can barely defend their own capital, let alone launch massive campaigns into the Dakhan, like Aurangzeb was doing. And my final acknowledgement is I am not a historian. And so history is hard. That's one thing I've learned. It's easy to read a book, and it's a very different thing to make a definitive statement that this happened on this date by this person, and this is why they did it. And so not all sources are created equal. I will be greatly benefiting from the work that Uday Kulkarni has done and compressing it into hopefully an entertaining and gripping story. So if I forget your favorite detail in the story, your favorite sub-battle, subplot, forgive me, but I will do my best. So let's continue. At last, The story begins with a death in Bhingar, and this death will really be a boon for the Marathas, and this will occur in 1707. And whose death was this? None other than the great Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. You see, he died in 1707 after an unsuccessful, nearly 30-year campaign to stamp out the Marathas in the Deccan. But he died and was unsuccessful in this attempt. And at last, Prince Shahu, who had been held captive by the Mughals, was released. Now, after some short period, Shahu was able to consolidate power and become the Chhatrapati, and he appointed a one Balaji Vishwanath as his Peshwa in 1713. And now, even though Shahu was released in 1707, there were still Maratha captives in Delhi, and the Maratha forces under Peshwa Balaji Vishwanath, they actually reached Delhi in 1719 and were able to do a couple of things. In addition to securing the release of these captives, including Yesubai, the mother of Shahu, they were able to get official legal recognition by the emperor that the Marathas were a legitimate legal entity, and that they could even collect south or tax revenue from the 6 provinces in the Deccan. So this was a huge win in legitimacy for the Marathas, in addition to getting their captives back. And so this first powerful Peshwa, Balaji Vishwanath, he will die in 1720 after a reign of only 7 years. And it is decided then that his son, Bajirao, will be the next Peshwa. And thus, the office of the Peshwa becomes kind of a hereditary system, passing from father to son. And really, the Peshwa will be imbibed with the power that the Chhatrapati was kind of known for in the times before. But for various reasons, Shahu will decide to retire in Satara and leave the day-to-day administration of the empire to the Peshwa. And so, usually we don't think of hereditary systems as working out very well. You might have a great king, and then his son turns out to be not such a great leader, and things turn downhill. However, in this case, Bajirao Peshwa was an absolute perfect choice for the job. He was a force of nature, and he grew the Maratha territory and prestige from the horseback, from the saddle directly. He was not sitting around and ordering troops to go on his behalf. He was with his troops. And he was basically undefeated in his 20-year time as Peshwa. And he was highly praised even by Western generals and commanders for what's called strategic mobility. And this is something that will be important later. You see, at this time, strategic mobility means moving incredibly fast on horseback, not being weighed down by heavy things like cannons, artillery, or perhaps a large supporting force. And this was really key. The territory in the north that the Marathas were expanding to was massive. So having the strategic mobility was key to their success. And so many powerful Maratha Sardars settled in the north, including names such as Malhar Rao Horkar and Jaya Pashinde. Now, what would occur is this would form a sort of confederacy that would deviate from Shivaji Maharaj's original vision of a central administration where all revenue goes to the treasury and then, soldiers' salaries are paid out from there. Instead, this is now becoming a semi-autonomous system where individual commanders and sardars are collecting tax revenue, paying their own soldiers, and almost acting as local lords. And as evidence of this, the Nagpur Marathas, in fact, form a distinct kingdom that remains part of the Confederacy. But this is because one of the northern commanders, Raghuji Bhosle, was so successful in expanding east that he was able to basically gain an entire empire for himself. And so the two photos here are of one outgoing character. On the right, we have the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, and on the left here, we have a portrait of Bajirao Peshwa. And the south tax we'll get more into later, but you can think of it just as the right to collect revenue for a given territory. And another picture here, it may be a little hard to see, but this will be from right before the eventual Third Panipat battle in 1760. And, at the time of Aurangzeb's death, the Marathas, were confined to the Deccan. They were just struggling to survive in a handful of forts. And just several decades later, you'll see this large area that's labeled as the Maratha Confederacy will go incredibly far north, extending past Delhi, and to the east here we see Nagpur as well, and even in the south. So this is the beginning of this great period of expansion for the Marathas. So what's going on with the Mughals? You see, in this same time that the Marathas are expanding, the Mughal emperor has basically been reduced to a puppet. Let's focus in on the year 1712. You see, after Aurangzeb's death, two brothers known as the Sayyid brothers became highly influential on the Mughal court and basically were bound to become kingmakers. Now, one of the sons of Aurangzeb, he was made emperor, but he dies only 5 years into his reign in 1712. And it's at this point that the next candidate to succeed him on the throne is immediately killed by these Sayyid brothers because they don't perceive him to be a good, obedient candidate that will follow their commands. And so they're able to select another princeling named Farrukh Siyar. And he ascends to the throne thanks to these brothers. And now it's official. The emperor is simply a figurehead. Now, Farrukh Siyar, he plays along for a little bit. He knows he's a pawn. But eventually he starts trying to rebel against the brothers. And so one of the brothers, Hussein Ali Khan, will eventually take issue with this. Some appointments in the Deccan, the emperor usurps that he had requested. And so in 1718, he marches on Delhi with the forces of Balaji Vishwanath, as we had mentioned on the previous slide. And of course, Hussein Ali Khan, he has his own agenda, but he tells the Marathas, hey, you have some agenda items to complete, join forces with me and let's go show the emperor who's boss. And so they marched into the Mughal court, or specifically Hussein Ali Khan does dramatically in 1719. And he takes down the emperor from his throne, takes him away, blinds him, imprisons him, and the emperor is eventually killed in this way. Now, the brothers Sayyid, they find two more princelings to put on the throne instead of Farrukh Siyar, but they don't even survive the year, actually. Tuberculosis and other natural causes take them. But they find another princeling, Muhammad Shah, and he is made the 13th Mughal emperor. And his reign actually sticks for a little bit, for a period of about 30 years, from 1719 to 1748. And eventually he will be able to shake off the Sayyid brothers' power, but he'll have other forces on the court to contend with. And here we have a picture. I should note I used AI to generate some of these pictures because naturally there are not very many drawings or paintings from the time. So this is an illustration of what it may have looked like when 10,000 Marathas marched into Delhi to get their agenda passed. So we've talked about the Marathas, we've talked about the Mughals. Now, what's their relationship like? And I would describe it sort of as frenemies, friendly enemies, you can say, or as friendly as two warring nations can be. And this time period of 20 years almost perfectly coincides with the time that Bajirao Peshwa is, leading the Marathas. So, why are they frenemies? Why are the Marathas not entirely stamping out the Mughals? As we're suggesting, the power balance is shifting to the point where the Marathas could do something like this. You see, Chhatrapati Shahu had explicitly forbade Bajirao from completely destroying the Mughals. For one reason or another, Shahu had a soft spot for the Mughals from his time in captivity, and so this was completely off the table. He said, leave the Mughals Delhi at least. We're not going to destroy them. So that's one reason. And another thing that's going on is that during this time period from 1719 to 1739, it's not just Marathas versus Mughals. You see, there are numerous previous vassal kingdoms of the Mughals that are starting to get their freedom back, and they're experiencing for the first time in many generations what's it like to not have a very powerful Mughal emperor keeping you in line. So some of these groups will be Rajput kingdoms, such as those in Jaipur and Jodhpur, the Jat kingdoms, another Hindu kingdom. And crucially, you'll have to remember this group, the Rohilla Afghan soldiers of fortune, who had settled to the east of the Ganga in what's called Rohilkhand. They are going to start causing some trouble and taking advantage of their newfound freedom. And another thing that's affecting the Marathas is something we'll call the distance problem. You see, it's about a 1.5 month journey one way from Pune to Delhi at this time. And this is part of the reason that these northern Maratha commanders needed to have some autonomy and be able to make decisions by themselves. It simply wasn't feasible to wait for the 3 months round trip to approve all decisions with the Peshwa. And as we discussed, Shahu had made some changes to the kind of central organization of the Maratha Empire and organized it more as a confederacy. And so some of these Maratha Sardars, they were incentivized to increase the territory directly under their own control, that they would financially benefit from it. And so they would be fighting the Mughals in some of these for-profit battles. And so generally, the Mughals and the Marathas during this time, they were competitive rivals. They would win some and they would lose some. But what I want to underscore is that this was mostly limited warfare with surrender and treaties and tribute extracted. This was not total war and a complete massacre of opposing armies. That was pretty rare to occur between the Marathas and the Mughals. And so our Peshwa, Bajirao, and other Sardars like Malhar Rao Horkar, they traded blows with high-ranking Mughal courtiers, such as one Safdar Jung, who is a very important Mughal figure that we'll talk about more. And in 1737 and 1738, they'll kind of trade wins and losses with him in some minor skirmishes and battles. And overall, I just want to emphasize that it's a complex, fragmented political landscape. It's easy to think of this as just Marathas and Mughals, but it's not that simple. Okay, so we talked about the Marathas and Mughals. So let's talk about one of these third-party groups, the Rajputs, and let's talk about a Maratha side quest to extract tribute from these Rajputs. You see, the Marathas, they legitimately needed huge amounts of money to fund armies that they were putting in the north and that were protecting these territories. But the commanders wanted profit too. And so in 1736, Bajirao will defeat Sawai Jai Singh of Jaipur and extract some tribute and taxation rights from him. And then 12 years later, the Sawai Jai Singh will pass away and there will be a succession battle among his sons. And here the Marathas take sides. You see Malhar Rao Horkar, he backs Madho Singh, one of these princes, against his half-brother Ishwari Singh. And this ends up resulting in the Battle of Bagru in August of 1748. Now, Madho Singh and Ishwari Singh, they both had claims to the throne, so I won't get into who was truly deserving. But, you know, given that Horkar was siding with Madho Singh and Ishwari Singh had no allies, he reached out to Suraj Mal Jat, who was previously a friend of his father. However, it's not enough, and Ishwari Singh is defeated. And when Ishwari Singh is defeated, he has to promise Malhar Rao Horkar that he's going to give him a massive amount of money and tribute and territory, and that's what the loss costs him. However, 2 years pass, and Malhar Rao feels that he is getting stiffed, that he is not getting the payment that was promised. So with the permission of the Peshwa, Malhar Rao marches on Jaipur, where Ishwari Singh is. And so in December of 1750, Ishwari Singh and his wives, they hear that Malhar Rao's army is coming, and they become terrified, potentially for irrational reasons, but we won't get into that. But they all consume poison, and they are dead. And so this makes Malhar Rao look bad, that these people essentially died over unpaid tribute, but it's just another tragedy in this mess that's occurring in the north. And kind of related to this, as this resentment is growing between the Marathas and the Rajputs at Jaipur, not even 2 months later, in the city of Jaipur, 3,000 Marathas will be massacred by these Rajput soldiers in kind of a surprise attack. So all this is to say that, if there are more players than just the Marathas and the Mughals, the Marathas are not doing a great job of making friends with these people. And so even though nominally you would expect that with these other Hindu kingdoms that have been under the thumb of these, cruel Mughals for so long, that this is a great opportunity to join hands. And yet the Marathas were sometimes fumbling this and becoming friendless. And this will be a problem later on. So now 1739. 1739 is a watershed year. This is when Iran's Nadir Shah changes the equation. So in 1739, Nadir Shah, he is at the tail end of an epic campaign, basically across the entire Middle East, coming from Iran, through Afghanistan, through Punjab, and all the way to Delhi, and he's just unstoppable. So he, at Delhi, in just 3 hours, in what's called the Battle of Karnal, he will defeat the Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah's forces in just 3 hours and basically take hold of the entire city. And why did Nadir Shah come? Why did some of these outsiders come? These places were relatively poor. If you just look at a map, you can see how much desert there is in Iran and Afghanistan. And relatively, India had great wealth to capture. So that's what attracted a guy like Nadir Shah to come to Delhi. And so when he came to Delhi, it's like an atomic bomb went off. The Mughal treasury was entirely looted. He takes it back to Iran. The peacock throne, which is jewel encrusted, has the Kohinoor diamond, is stolen. And in fact, in this picture you see here, this is Nadir Shah after he has entered Delhi and he's seated himself atop the Mughal peacock throne. And worse than all of this, barbaric violence is inflicted across Delhi. Thousands of people are massacred. This is not run-of-the-mill, even by these time standards, violence. Even the Mughals, who are innovative in their own right for coming up with new ways of cruelty, even they're taken aback by the levels of barbarism displayed. And so this is how Nadir Shah is changing the equation on what people think is possible. So a small side note from this time is that Safdar Jung, one of the prominent Mughal courtiers, as we discussed earlier, he also has Shia Iran ancestry. And so he bribes Nadir Shah to succeed his uncle Sadat Khan as the Nawab of Awadh. And if you don't know what Awadh is, you can just know that it's a very prosperous and rich kingdom that's not too far from Delhi, in a region called the Doab. And whoever is Nawab of Awadh is a very rich individual indeed. And at this time, basically rivaling the wealth of the emperor himself. So this was an important chess move, you can say, that will set up Safdar Jung to be a major player in the future. So where was Bajirao at this time? Bajirao happened to be in the south, and he was holding the line at the Narmada River, which is the border of the Deccan, the gateway to the south. As he had heard from an envoy about the troubled situation in Delhi, and he was advised not to come, as there was just absolute terror occurring, and this could jeopardize any future defensive line that was to be set up in case Nadir Shah came closer south. However, Nadir Shah did not come any closer, and he returns to Iran after this. Now, this will mark the end of an era and the start of another era in a few ways. As next year, Bajirao will die, and his brother Chimaji Appa will die the year after that, and he was also a important and powerful Maratha commander in the north. So very quickly, the northern situation is changing. What was an insulated bubble of Indians within India and just the troubles they had within themselves, now India was cracked wide open. And the outsiders saw that the polite fiction was over, that the emperor had no clothes, and Delhi was open for business. So now let's talk about our friend Abdali. You see, when I said that Nadir Shah changes the equation, Abdali was actually a 25-year-old foot soldier in the army of Nadir Shah at this time. Nadir Shah was very powerful, and Iran basically controlled a lot of Afghanistan at this time, which is why Abdali had fallen under his control. But things change, and Abdali, in his own right, becomes a king in Afghanistan. And he remembered the wealth that had been extracted from Delhi. He had seen it with his own eyes. And Afghanistan shares a border with Punjab, which was a longtime Mughal territory and also very rich. And Abdali said, hey, I don't need to go all the way to Delhi. I'll start by taking Punjab. And so we have a series of conflicts between Abdali and the Mughals at Punjab from 1748 to 1752, about 10 years before the Third Battle of Panipat, for context. So this starts off with the Battle of Lahore, fought in January of 1748. And this is where Ahmad Shah Abdali claims Punjab for the first time. And he defeats the Mughal Subedar, who is defending it. And he's basically able to secure a large ransom and loots the city. And he doesn't stop there. He continues south towards Delhi. However, he is met by a huge coalition of Mughal armed forces. And this leads to the Battle of Manupur in March of 1748, just 2 months later. And here, Abdali is defeated by Qamar ud-Din Khan before he can get to Delhi, and he has to turn back. However, he does a good job at preventing basically the destruction of his forces, so relatively not the worst loss you can face. And so once Abdali is repelled, the Mughals are able to put a new Subedar back in Lahore and kind of establish control over the Punjab once again. And his name is Mir Mannu. That's actually his title, but for whatever reason, it kind of became his name as well. So we'll call him Mir Mannu. He's now established in Lahore under the Mughal control. And so not even 1748 hasn't even ended yet. And Abdali returns to Lahore. He attacks again in late 1748 when it's under the control of Mir Mannu. He's repelled. But as a fun fact, even the Afghans and the Mughals are not the only player up here. The Sikhs are starting to kind of gain prominence, and they briefly control Lahore in 1751. But at this time, they're not really a major player. But then finally, in early 1752, Abdali returns in force, and he besieges Lahore for over 4 months with Mir Mannu's forces inside. And so the Subedar Mir Mannu, he appeals to Delhi. He appeals to the emperor. He says, hey, I'm doing everything I can here to hold out against Abdali. Send help, send anyone. But he receives nothing. And so finally, on March 6th, 1752, Mir Mannu is defeated. He's forced to surrender. However, Abdali was very impressed with him. And instead of replacing him with his own Afghan replacement, Abdali retains him just under Afghan administration. So this was very becoming of an emperor, Mir Mannu thought, and it was his clever tongue that also helped save his skin there. But Abdali flips Punjab, basically, and Lahore under his own control. And this is troubling to many people on the Mughal court. And this will lead to something called the Treaty of Kannauj, which will plant the seeds for the Panipat battle about 9 years prior in 1752. Now, if you don't remember a single thing from this presentation, I want you to remember the Treaty of Kannauj and how it was maybe the single most important factor in dragging the Marathas into the eventual battle at Panipat. You see, by this time, Safdar Jung, this powerful Mughal courtier that we talked about, had become Vizier, Grand Vizier of the Mughal court, and was a very powerful figure. And he was having trouble with the Rohilla Afghans in Rohilkhand, which was kind of neighboring with his Awadh kingdom. So he had made his own deal. He had made a treaty, a more minor treaty in February of 1752 with the Marathas to help drive out these Rohilla Afghans. So he was used to dealing with the Maratha commanders, Malhar Rao Holkar and Shinde, and they had some history in deal making. However, it's around this time when Abdali takes over Lahore, flips Mir Mannu, that he writes to the Mughal emperor and demands that he formally cede Punjab to the Afghans. And so this really wakes up the Mughal Wazir Safdar Jung, and he says, we need to do something about this. This Abdali guy is not going away. So in April of 1752, Safdar Jung is heading to Delhi with Horkar and Shinde, on the tail end of their operations against the Rohillas. And so without the emperor being present, without the Peshwa, obviously, who's in Pune being present, Safdarjung, Horkar, and Shinde, they sign what's called the Treaty of Kanauj, which is an agreement basically that the Marathas will defend the Mughals at Delhi against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And the Marathas, to be fair, they were getting a decent trade, or so it seemed to Horkar and Shinde at the time. They were entitled to the Tsaut, which is a 25% tax on the total revenue of a given area from the very wealthy Doab and Punjab territories. In addition, they were granted outright governorship of Agra and Ajmer, which were very dear to some of these other Hindu kingdoms, the Jats and the Rajputs. They thought they deserved these. So the Marathas were getting some valuable land in exchange for this defense treaty, you can say. And so that is why this is the seeds for Panipat. This is a legally binding contractual obligation that the Marathas will protect the Mughals no matter what. And now here is the kicker. Because the Treaty of Kanauj was signed without the knowledge of the emperor, by the time Safdarjung and the Marathas reach Delhi and speak with the emperor, they find out that the Emperor Ahmad Shah has already ceded in a letter the Punjab to Abdali out of fear from his previous request on what would be done if he refused. And so now you see the problem. The Marathas are entitled to collect tax from the Punjab, and yet Punjab is completely in the hands of Ahmad Shah Abdali. And the emperor is throwing his hands in the air and saying, look, the tax revenue is there. If you want it, you get it. So this is pretty clearly going to set up a confrontation in the future between the Marathas and the Afghans. So this is also a very chaotic time for the Mughal court at Delhi. There are divided factions and a lot of drama that's occurring in 1753. You see, the Mughal court is divided into Persian and Afghan sympathizing factions. And this kind of also loosely causes a rift on the Shia and Sunni lines. They may all be Muslim, but they don't always see eye to eye on many things. And this actually, to a surprising degree, will cause issues when taking to the battlefield or setting up camp and things like that. But at the moment, Safdarjung, who we've spoken about, and he has the Shia Iran kind of ancestry, so he's on the Persian sympathizing side of the court. He basically has total power. He has no significant rivals at this time. And he's really taking advantage of that. He is basically looting the Mughal treasury for his own purposes, and there's no one who can answer. Now, we see an interesting character here emerge. We're not going to talk too much about him, but there is a special young man named Imad ul Mulk, who Safdarjung had kind of made his adopted son. And Safdarjung made him Mir Bakshi, which is, which is the paymaster general, an incredibly powerful position on the Mughal court at the age of 16 in 1752, 1753 timeframe. However, instead of being thankful, Imad ul Mulk immediately begins plotting against Safdarjung. And so we said Safdarjung had no significant rivals on the court. In fact, he just created his own biggest rival, which will be a fatal mistake in Imad ul Mulk. And so at this time, Abdali, now just less than a year after the signing of the Treaty of Kanauj and the legal gain of Punjab, he goes a step further. He writes to the emperor and he demands 50 lakh rupees be given to him, a huge amount of money as tribute. And at this point, Safdarjung, on behalf of the Mughals, he invokes the Treaty of Kanauj and he calls the Marathas. He said, we're being threatened. Abdali's going to come attack. This is what the treaty's for. Come in force and defend us. And just to underscore the chaos and the lack of communication that's going on with the Mughals right now, Safdarjung, he doesn't want to pay Abdali at all. He doesn't want to appease him. He wants the Marathas to come kick butt. Meanwhile, the emperor is operating from a place of fear. So he makes a down payment. He agrees to pay Abdali, but he can't afford all 50 lakhs at once. So he pays him 5 lakhs as a token, a down payment, and promises that he'll pay more. But you can see the right hand and the left hand in the Mughal Empire are just absolutely not functioning and not talking to each other at this time. Furthermore, you have the queen mother, her name was Udhambai, who had gotten angry with Safdarjung at this time as he had been meddling in her affairs. And I won't get too deep into the complication, but at some point, Safdarjung and the emperor have a rift. And Safdarjung is angry with his court rivals and with the emperor. And so in May of 1753, he invites Surajmal Jat and their army to come into Delhi and just loot it a little bit, just to show that he's in charge and that he can cause chaos whenever he wants it. And the emperor can't really do anything about it. So you have these major schisms and almost a state of mild civil war occurring in the streets of Delhi during this time. And despite the looming danger of Abdali on the border, these people in the court are just entirely focused on their own petty squabbles and power grabs. And so in the next year, in 1754, Safdarjung will die. And his son, Shuja-ud-Dawla, will become the next Nawab of Awadh and kind of take his role. He will not be the Wazir immediately, but as we said, the Nawab of Awadh is inherently a rich and powerful position and one of the major players in the Mughal Empire. So as this court drama is occurring, we see with the Marathas a series of unfortunate events will occur from 1754 to 1755 that will kind of undermine and lead to some of the Maratha leaders in the north dying. So we have the situation in Delhi where there's Surajmal Jat's army running around in the streets, and Imad ul-Mulk, who also has the ability to invoke the Treaty of Kannauj, he makes a plea to the Marathas, and he says, hey, we have enemies. They may not be Abdali, but we have domestic enemies running around causing chaos. Come to Delhi and put a stop to this. And so the Marathas dispatch 3 of their powerful generals, Raghunath Rao, who's the brother of the Nana Sahib Peshwa at this time, and we have Malhar Rao Horkar, and we have Jayappa Shinde. And they are on their way north to cool this situation down in Delhi. When the situation resolves itself, Surajmal Jat's army is repelled and they go home. So basically, by the time they reach the north, the situation is cooled down. However, we mentioned that Imad ul-Mulk is a scheming individual, and he is still angry at Surajmal Jat for the role he played in this chaos in Delhi. And so he convinces the Marathas to go to Surajmal Jat's fort at Kumbher and attack him as kind of revenge for attacking the Mughals. And the Marathas, as we said, they're there to keep the peace, but they're also there, if they can, to extract tribute. And so in January of 1754, Malhar Rao Horkar, he goes to Surajmal Jat at Kumbher and he demands 1 crore rupees, an incredible amount, and he's of course refused. And so they lay a siege, and 2 months later, the only son of Malhar Rao Horkar, Khande Rao Horkar, is killed by cannon fire while inspecting the fort walls during the siege. And this really makes Malhar Rao upset. And what should have just been a simple collection of tribute now becomes a prestige issue. And he makes a vow to take Surajmal's head and turn the Kumbher fort into a mountain of mud. And when a person like Malhar Rao Horkar said this, people listen. And Surajmal Jat becomes incredibly scared, and he appeals to Shinde and Raghoba, which is Raghunath Rao, and they manage to cool down Horkar, but he's incredibly angry. And so the second unfortunate event, besides this death of Khande Rao and the anger of Malhar Rao, and further distrust with the Jats, is Jayappa Shinde. The next year, in 1755, he will take an interest in the Jodhpur succession struggle, kind of like the Marathas had done in the Jaipur succession struggle a decade earlier. And he will favor this guy Ram Singh over his rival Bijay Singh. And so Bijay Singh, he turns out to have more strength than anticipated, and he'll entrench himself at the Nagaur fort. And while this siege is being laid, similar story again, while Jayappa's camp is outside the fort, Bijay Singh's men on July 25th, 1755, will infiltrate the camp of Shinde and pose as Gosavis, or holy men, and they cause a commotion in the Shinde camp. And this causes Jayappa himself to come and investigate And this is when their true intentions are revealed. They kill him in a brutal melee attack. So you can see that just some of these should be simple situations are turning into tragedies for no reason and just causing deeper and deeper distrust between all of these Maratha and other Hindu kingdoms. So now, 1757. I think one thing that's important to underscore in this story is we've all heard Abdali has invaded India five times, six times, but he doesn't always reach the same place into India. And we've talked about how he's invaded Punjab several times up until this point. But in 1757, Ahmad Shah Abdali finally reaches Delhi on his own, not with Nadir Shah's army. And the reason that Abdali came this time is that one of these Rohilla leaders, Nazib Khan Rohilla, and even the emperor himself, Alamgir II, had urged Abdali to return as a check on Imad ul Mulk's recklessness, as he was kind of de facto sovereign and causing chaos in the Mughal Empire at Delhi at this time. And so in January of 1757, Abdali arrived in Delhi with 80,000 men and defeated the small token Maratha force that was supposed to be defending the city. And he tortured and looted and was relentless in his pursuit of wealth. And at this point, Nazib Khan Rohilla is rewarded for his loyalty to Abdali and through their Afghan shared heritage. And he is appointed as Abdali's kind of subedar or commander of Delhi, as you can say, while Abdali leaves to continue his exploits. And Abdali makes his son Taimur Shah the Afghan subedar in Lahore at this point. You see, though, Abdali doesn't stay long. The Afghan soldiers, they're not used to the Indian hot summer. And further, there's actually an outbreak of cholera in Abdali's camp. And so after just a few months, in April of 1757, before any major resistance can be mounted, Abdali's forces begin to head home. And it's a month after this, in May of 1757, that the huge Maratha force led by Raghunath Rao reaches Agra and is kind of within striking distance of Delhi. But Abdali may be gone, but Delhi is still under the control of his vassal, Nazib Khan. So there's still a battle to be fought. So in 1757, a battle of Delhi is fought, and the Marathas swiftly defeat Nazib Khan. But there's a catch here, actually, that Nazib Khan, he should have been punished, really. Raghunath Rao, he wanted to kill Nazib Khan if possible. But this is where a particular kind of funny quirk of the story comes out and reveals itself, which is that one of the Maratha commanders, Malhar Rao Horkar, he has a special relationship with Nazib Khan Rohilla, despite all of their differences and reasons why they would be enemies. And he considers him his Manas Putra, his acknowledged son. And so he tells Raghoba Dada, he says, over my dead body, you'll kill Nazib Khan. And so Nazib Khan is let go. And we're going to talk a lot about mistakes that the Marathas make in the lead up to the Third Battle of Panipat. And this is a mistake that cannot be overlooked. And it's not just Nazib Khan that's let go repeatedly. There are other enemies, such as the Nizam at Hyderabad in the south, who was defeated by Baji Rao many, many times. And while he signed treaties for peace, he then continued to cause trouble later. And we will see that Nazib Khan is going to cause all of the trouble later, and it's going to lead to disastrous consequences. So Raghunath Rao's campaign north is not done. They defeat Nazib Khan at Delhi, and then they continue north because Abdali has caused all sorts of chaos. He's installed his own people at Lahore. So in February of 1758, the Marathas, they begin their invasion of Punjab. They besiege Sarhind, and in April, they are licking at the heels of Taimur Shah and Jahan Khan, who's a commander of Abdali, who are then forced to retreat to Afghanistan. And the Marathas at this point are really putting the fear of God into the Afghans and chasing their rear guards and harassing them all the way across the rivers back to Afghanistan. And as you can see in this map, Raghuba's campaign started at Pune, went north to Jaipur, reached Delhi, fought with Nazib here, went further north to Lahore. And this is the point where Raghunath Rao himself doesn't go any further north, but Maratha forces actually continue even further north, all the way to Attock here at the Indus River. And something else that will be important later is you can see just how many rivers are here in this area of Punjab. And Punjab is actually the land of 5 rivers. And this will be something that's also going to be important later, especially in part 2, is the ability to cross rivers. If this is the one time that the Marathas are coming up here in force, they're getting a little bit of practice crossing these rivers. But imagine a guy like Abdali and his forces, who's now on his 4th or 5th trip, through the Khyber Pass and heading down to Delhi. So the ability to cross these rivers is both one thing that may have hindered the Marathas in going past Attock, and was also making it difficult to harass and chase the Afghans effectively while they were retreating. But either way, this is the furthest point of Maratha expansion ever. And so Raghunath Rao, he appoints a guy named Adina Beg as the Subedar at Punjab in exchange for the income to the tune of 75 lakh rupees per year from this incredibly rich province. It's at this point that Raghunath Rao is recalled by Nana Sahib Peshwa to return to the south and fight a different battle. However, Adina Beg, who was appointed at Punjab, he dies shortly after this, prematurely, and Punjab descends back into chaos. And so this was a fatal mistake by the Marathas. This awesome campaign that reached all the way north and was able to drive out Abdali failed to consolidate its gains. And, they would all fall apart in short order. And this is a picture from the Solstice at Panipat book. It's from a more modern time, I think, in the last 50 years. But it's a picture of the fort at Attock. And in the foreground, you have the Indus River. And for the Marathas, this was far from home indeed. So now, with Raghunath Rao heading south, there's going to be a new supreme commander in the north for the Marathas. And his name is going to be Dattaji Shinde. And so, just several months later, in March of 1759, Dattaji will reach all the way to Punjab with a force of 40,000 men as a kind of relief force for Raghunath Rao. Now, Dattaji is a little different. He is a man who had the full trust and confidence of the Peshwa. We won't go too deep into this, but some of these northern commanders, Malhar Rao Holkar, they didn't have the full respect necessarily of the Peshwa. There were various reasons for this, but Dattaji, he had the full trust and confidence of the Peshwa that he would fulfill whatever mission was thrown his way. And so once he's at Punjab, Dattaji Shinde has orders to go east, to cross the Doab, and we'll talk about this map in a second, and in fact go all the way to Bengal and conquer Bengal, and on the way to suppress the Rohillas, who had been a persistent thorn in the side of basically everyone. And now this is when things come to a head. Let me explain this map for a moment. So we're looking at the two most easily identifiable things, let me use my laser pointer, are perhaps the 2 rivers here. You have the Yamuna River and the Ganga River. And Delhi, as we know, is on the west side of the Yamuna River. I've used these lightning bolts as areas where significant battles have occurred or will occur. Hint for the future, you can now see where Panipat is located in case you weren't aware. It's just slightly north of Delhi. There's a fort at Kunjapura where there will be a significant battle before Panipat later. But the Doab, we've kind of been talking about a little. It's the region, this incredibly fertile and rich region between the 2 rivers, Yamuna and Ganga. And this is also where the kingdom of Awadh is located. And as you can see, it is quite close to Delhi. However, once you cross over to the eastern bank of the Ganga, you are now in what's called Rohilkhand. We've talked a lot about Nazib Khan ud-Dawla, right? Guess what his capital is called? Nazibabad. So that's immediately to the east of the Ganga River. And so Nazib ud-Dawla now feels, even though he's been allowed to survive and go back to his own kingdom, even after his defeat at the Battle of Delhi the year prior, he feels that the Marathas now crossing the Ganga and going into Rohilkhand represents an existential threat, not only against the Rohillas, but against all of Islam in the north of India, which he feels has been, kind of getting watered down with the weakness of the Mughals and everything. And he feels that the very existence and domination of Islam in the north is at risk. And so Nazib duped the Marathas. Dattaji Shinde was initially working with him, and Nazib had promised to help build a bridge across the Ganga. But secretly, he was in correspondence with Abdali and the entire time begging him to come back and drive out these Kafirs, as he called them. And so Abdali does exactly that. And in November of 1759, just 6 months after Dattaji reaches to the north, news breaks among the Marathas that Abdali is back and has taken Lahore. Now, during this time, during the monsoon season, Dattaji had in fact laid a siege on Nazib Khan's forces at the Shukratal fort here. But now he had to leave to deal with the threat of Abdali, who was coming from the north. And so Dattaji's attack here at Shukratal forces him to leave in November of 1759. Now we see a catastrophe for the Marathas. You see, Dattaji is going to be killed in action in 1760. At the Battle of Tarori in December of 1759, Abdali has crossed the Khyber Pass with 42,000 troops after securing his win in the Afghan Civil War. And Dattaji and the Marathas, they come to face him, in fact, with Mughal troops under the command of Imad-ul-Mulk as well. However, in their push for, in this case, strategic mobility, they had not brought any of their heavy artillery pieces or cannons. And the Afghans had muskets with them. And so the Marathas were forced to retreat. They just couldn't contend with the disparity in firepower, and Dattaji immediately was regretting not bringing these heavier guns. And so, yes, Abdali was able to retake Lahore on his way to Delhi. And Imad-ul-Mulk is further causing chaos in Delhi. He actually orders the assassination, the murder of Alamgir II, who is Abdali's favored Mughal emperor at this time. And it just enrages Abdali, and he wants to go to Delhi and set things straight. And so this leads to the fatal Battle of Burari Ghat on January 10th, 1760. Dattaji Shinde is killed at the Ghat on the Yamuna River near Delhi by Nazib Khan Rohilla's forces on a foggy morning. And his death kind of shattered the myth of Maratha invincibility in the north. Dattaji Shinde, his nickname by the Peshwa at the time was the Soldier of God. How would you feel if your Soldier of God was killed one fine day? It must be devastating. Even Malhar Rao Holkar got a bitter taste of the Afghan army's speed and vigor, but he was able to escape narrowly with his cavalry forces. So now finally, when the message made it back, the Peshwa will wake up in Pune and he will understand that Abdali is not just another raider, but in fact, he is an existential threat to Maratha dominance in the north. And a large Maratha army with capable commanders is now going to need to be sent up north once again and not make the same mistakes of the past. And so this leads to now the start of the Panipat campaign in March of 1760. Now, one character that we haven't talked about yet is that of Sadashiv Rao Bhau. He's the son of Chimaji Appa and the cousin of Nana Sahib Peshwa. He's an excellent administrator and warrior. And at this time, just a month after the death of Dattaji Shinde, he's victorious against the Nizam of Hyderabad at Udgir. And he acquires a very valuable asset indeed, which we'll talk more about in part 2. But it is the French-trained Gardi artillery troops with incredibly long-range and destructive cannons, which basically hadn't been seen on this battlefield before. But the celebration from the battle at Udgir and the victory was short-lived, as on February 13th, news of Dattaji's death reached Pune, and the celebration immediately ends. And it's now that the Peshwa wakes up and decides that they need to have an emergency war council at Batadur. And at this point, Raghunath Rao is considered to be the leader of this new campaign, as he was the leader of the previous one in 1757. And he did a fine job, it should be noted. But he was a little greedy, and he demanded 1 crore rupees from the Peshwa to lead this effort. And one thing that we haven't talked about too much, and kind of maybe rationalizes the Maratha desire for money is that they were deeply in debt. The Peshwa was deeply in debt, debts that he'd inherited. And so this was just completely out of the question to give Raghunath Rao 1 crore rupees when the previous campaign had yielded massive amounts of debt. And so he's ruled out. And so Sadashiv Rao Bhau is appointed the supreme commander at this conclave as clearly a proven military genius with this huge victory under his belt, but with zero North Indian political exposure. He's never gone on a campaign like Raghunath Rao has to the north, let alone spent years there like Malhar Rao Horkar or some of the Shindes had. And another mistake, just because Raghunath Rao is not leading this campaign, he could have at least joined Bhau and used his vast wealth of political knowledge about the landscape in the north to the Marathas' advantage, but he declines due to his ego, and he says he's not going. And finally, it's decided that Sadashiv Rao Bhau is not going to go alone. In fact, the son of Nana Sahib Peshwa, the young Vishwas Rao, is appointed as the sovereign figurehead to kind of join on this campaign. And so, barely a month after their victory at Udgir, Bhau departs with Vishwas Rao straight from Patadur with no rest and crucially no proper integration of that French artillery regiment, the Gardis, with another famed Maratha unit, the cavalry unit, the Huzurat, for instance, which was a formidable force in its own right. But the fact that these two forces never trained together before going on this historic campaign would prove to be a fatal mistake. And so in total, you have 55,000 troops embarking on this giant campaign. But as a key, and something that we'll discuss more in part 2, there is an even greater number of non-combatants tagging along. And we'll talk more about that and why it's also a mistake. But for now, here is just a sneak peek at the route that Bhau and Abdali take before their eventual meeting at Panipat. It's a little small, but I just want to finally underscore kind of the huge distances involved here and what a wonder it was that, relatively speaking, all of this was able to go off without a hitch. You can see straight from Udgir, Bhau's forces will leave, completely bypassing Pune, and they're going to go straight north and head towards Delhi and Panipat. So, okay, I've spoken a lot, and I know you guys may be getting bored and having some questions. So that is basically a wrap on part 1. And I just want to leave you with a small summary of some of the characters who have played a role so far and will continue to play a role in part 2. So we have Nana Sahib Peshwa. He's the son of Bajirao Peshwa. He has big shoes to fill. And he's doing a good job at filling them for, he's been Peshwa now for some time, since his father's death. So he's the prime minister of the Maratha Empire, and he's based out of Pune. And he's a talented administrator and statesman, and the man who really developed Pune as we know it today. If you walk around Pune, you will see the fingerprints of Nana Sahib Peshwa everywhere. And while we mainly know him as an administrator, he was also a competent commander when called upon. So the other big boss, Ahmad Shah Abdali, here it says Durrani. That's one thing you'll notice is when translating into English, you get many, many different spellings. So just be aware of that. So as we said, Abdali, he was a former foot soldier in the army of Iran's Nadir Shah, and he was deeply impressed by the riches in Delhi when he came as a young man at the age of 25. And later, he would go on to become an Afghan king in his own right and is considered the founder of modern Afghanistan, which is a pretty big deal. And at the time when he enters India for this final big third battle of Panipat, he had just won the Afghan civil war. And this is what allowed him to take his focus off of the home situation and come to India once again. And it should not be discounted. He was really known for his military acumen and general's mind and battlefield leadership. He was a great leader, despite the fact that, everyone here is probably on the Maratha side, rooting for the Marathas. You should not think less of your enemies for the skills that they truly did possess. And so now the uncle and nephew duo who are going north to fulfill their destiny. Sadashiv Rao Bhau, the commander of the Maratha army, sent to check Abdali's constant interference, looting, and violent raids. At the time of this campaign, he's 30 years old. He's short-tempered, but he's as straight as an arrow. However, he's not quite cunning enough. He's a little too honest. However, he is a true believer, an advocate in Swarajya, i.e. an India for Indians, not under the control of foreign leaders. Most recently, he's victorious at Utgir against the Nizam and thus adopted the French Guard, the artillery force, which was a new weapon in the Maratha arsenal, it should be noted. However, he's lacking experience with the northern political situation, like we said. But as kind of evidence for his visionary military prowess, he foresees a need for this artillery to fight in the plains of northern India. It may not end up being executed exactly as he hoped, but he is right. When you are on a flat plain, you're going to need artillery, or you're going to be sitting duck in this new era of modern warfare. So now Vishwasrao, we briefly mentioned him. He's the eldest son of Nana Sahib Peshwa, next in line to be Peshwa himself, and he's just 19 years of age. He's considered by many to be the most handsome man in India at this time. Now, why was he sent? He was sent to gain battlefield experience and also, crucially, to share some of the credit for what was to be a presumed victory over Abdali. You see, Bhau was also growing his influence and power, and it's not that Nana Sahib Peshwa had any true suspicions of his cousin, but he was a Peshwa, and that he could be a political threat. And so Nana Sahib Peshwa was intent on keeping some of the credit for this victory to be in his own family. But despite this, Vishwasrao actually had a very close and warm relationship with his uncle Bhau. And so there was never really any consideration of, dislike between the two. And in fact, Vishwasrao, he'd sent a letter to his father from Panipat, where he's praising his uncle Bhau. And he says, "You will get many sons like me, but never again will you get a brother like Bhau." And lastly, well, maybe second to lastly, let's talk about these unlikely collaborators. We'd mentioned this, but Nazib-ud-Dawla Khan, also known as Nazib Khan Rohilla, and a few other names, him and the Maratha Sardar Malhar Rao Holkar, they were kind of like a father and son duo, an unlikely collaborator pair in some ways. So a little more about Nazib Khan. He is a Rohilla leader, and he invited Abdali. Various people were inviting Abdali to India and Delhi, but he was the most persistent of these invitees. And he perceived the Marathas to be an existential threat, and he never wanted them to have any role in the north of India. And he was a great uniter, kind of like Abdali. He united the Rohilla Afghan chiefs in Rohilkhand to his cause. And he's considered as the main domestic antagonist of the Marathas, who was pushing for this face-off. We talked very briefly about Shuja-ud-Dawla, the son of Safdar-Jung. As the Nawab of Awadh, a very important character, Nazib Khan will be the one to persuade Shuja-ud-Dawla to join forces against the Marathas. And in the search for allies in the north, it doesn't get much better than securing the support of the Nawab of Awadh. And of course, now finally, he had this inexplicable special relationship as the adopted son of Malhar Rao Holkar. And in the eventual battle, he will lead one of the main center flanks or center left flank of the Abdali coalition during the Third Battle of Panipat. So he has skin in the game, to say the least. And now Malhar Rao Holkar, in fact, he was mentored by Baji Rao Peshwa and became a battle-hardened, respected, and powerful northern Maratha commander. And his philosophy was kind of live to fight another day, which in Hindi I think is Sar Salamat to Pagdi Pachas, which is loosely like if you survive, you can wear all the hats or have all the treasure, but must survive. So that was always his prerogative. And he was a believer in the Ganimi Kawa, which was kind of attributed to Shivaji Maharaj a lot, but the concept of choosing the time and place of engaging with your enemy, causing a lot of chaos and then disappearing. So he didn't like to, line up neatly and get your artillery pieces ready and fight a formal battle. He was more with the Ganimi Kawa camp. And thus he distrusted this new age French artillery strategy. When it comes time to set up a plan for the Third Battle of Panipat, him and Bhau will be at odds on how much they should rely on this artillery strategy. And generally, he has bitter relations with the Shinde clan, which is one of the other big Maratha commanding families in the north. And he has differences with Sadashirao Bhau and Ibrahim Khan Gardi. We haven't talked so much about him, but he's the actual commander of those artillery forces. And so this will kind of influence the Maratha plan later. And lastly, he treated Nazib Khan as sort of an adopted son, Manasputra, and prevented his killing after the defeat at the Battle of Delhi in 1757. Okay, these are the last characters, more Marathas. So we talked a little bit about Raghunath Rao Peshwa, also known as Raghoba Dada. He was also a son of Bajirao I, and thus the younger brother of Nana Sahib Peshwa. And he was experienced and a good commander, as we saw. He led campaigns in the north, but he was power hungry and he had some character flaws. And ultimately, when the critical moment came to return to the north and choose a commander, he refused to return unless he was paid a king's ransom of 1 crore rupees. So he was passed over. And finally, the tragic figure of Dattaji Shinde, who the Peshwa had called the soldier of God, and he called Abdali Namarda, which is a less nice way of saying cowardly, for his strategy of commanding from the rear. But as we said, this was actually a great strength of Abdali's, that he had modern commanding strategies and wasn't putting himself in a vulnerable position. And so even against the Afghan and Rohilla muskets that he was facing, his weapon of choice in his hand was still a spear. We mentioned he had some regret at not bringing artillery pieces, so he's not entirely illogical, but perhaps he wasn't mentally fully embracing this age of modern projectile-based warfare, and he was more focused on honor. And so finally, his death would shake Maratha morale greatly. And Sadashirao Bhau will eventually get to avenge Dattaji's loss at the Kunjapura fort by beheading Qutub Shah, who actually had beheaded Dattaji along with Nazib Khan. And so we'll get into that in part 2. And he has the famous last words when he was lying there on the ground dying. He was asked by Qutub Shah, "Will you keep fighting Patel?" And he said, "Bachenge to aur bhi larenge," which is, "If I survive, then I'll fight some more." So he was a true warrior till the end. And then finally, some supporting actors. Shuja ud-Dawla, the son of Safdar Jung, the Nawab of Awadh, and a Shia Muslim with family roots in Iran. He's going to be vital for the Afghan coalition's strength and resources in what will be kind of a prolonged pause before the actual battle occurs. And this will become just as much a battle of logistics and sabotaging supply chains as it will be about the actual battle. And so he'll end up tilting the scales in the Afghans' favor in a significant way. And that's not to say he's entirely loving Abdali and the Afghans' cause. He is conflicted ultimately about choosing sides, but he had to align with the Afghans at some point, as Abdali was at his doorsteps, breathing down his neck while the Marathas were hundreds of miles away, another place where their lack of strategic mobility will kind of fail them. And then finally, Ibrahim Khan Gardi. We'll hear a lot more about him in the part 2. He was trained under the French Debussy, who was going to be the future governor general at the French colony of Pondicherry. But he was employed by the Nizam at Hyderabad until Bhau defeated him at Udgir. And Bhau was so impressed, and he saw that this was the future of warfare, that he offered Ibrahim Khan Gardi employment on the spot. And Ibrahim Khan, he accepted. He had a few conditions: that his troops be paid in cash on a timely basis. Whereas, if you're on a long campaign, the idea is generally stick it out, and in a few months when we win, you'll get paid then, or, you'll get paid in loot. His forces were much more professional and demanded otherwise, but in return, he was loyal to the Marathas. However, after the eventual defeat, he's injured, will be captured by Abdali, and his loyalty will lead to his death. He's killed after refusing to join the Afghans. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for talking for so long, but that is the Third Battle of Panipat, Part 1. The stage is set. The final confrontation is near. Thank you for listening to Part 1. Thank you for being patient with me. This was my first time doing any long-form historical presentation. So hopefully that was both engaging and informative. So thank you. And if there's any questions and answers or discussion, we can get into that now.
Wow. Beautiful presentation. I'm so proud of you, Rohan. I can't thank you enough. It was extremely well organized, well narrated, and decorated with contemporary and classy paintings, which were like so much supporting and adding a lot of character to the story. And so many minute details and complicated politics that goes before the battle itself. So understanding all these casts and supporting actors and whole uh, network of all these leaders and their incentives there is extremely important in understanding the battle that goes forth, right? So extremely well presented. One of the best presentations in Itihas Manch, I would say. I can't imagine it's so organized and well with a lot of details. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Dhanyawad. Thank you. Thank you.
And Pramod ji, great thank you to you. I mean, you
Thank you.
have trained him so well, and I know the background stories. Actually, people here may not fully know, but I know Rohan and Pramod ji were discussing this history for many years, almost every day or most of the days of the week, and they read together the books. They discussed historic details in great detail, and now we have like such a fine presenter for Itihas Manch. Thank you, Pramodji. Wonderful
Thank
job.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. So I think it's open to all. What do you all think? Any questions and comments?